everyone. Welcome to Ad America TV. My name is Genara, and I am one of the e-guides here in Ad America. I hope that everyone is staying safe and healthy today. And if you're new here, Ad America is the U.S. Embassy's American Center, and our mission is to provide a space for young Indonesians to learn more about the United States. In a few moments, we will start our event that is called You Can Help Make the World Free of Hunger and Food Insecurity. But before we start the event, let's spice things up with a little trivia. Our trivia question for today is, which US state has the worst food insecurity? Is it A, Nevada, B, Louisiana, C, New Mexico, or D, Mississippi? Stay tuned until the end of our event because we will be giving a live shout out for those who can answer the question correctly. Other than that, don't forget to take a selfie and tag Ad America's Instagram account. And now, without further ado, let's give the warmest welcome to our moderator for today's event, Denisa Rizkia, Corporate Partnership Manager at International NGO. Kak Denisa, the time is yours.
Hello, Genara. I hope I spell your name correctly. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Welcome to all of our guests. I believe we have our guests here on Zoom, but we also have our online guests in Twitter, Facebook, Zoom, YouTube, and Instagram as well. So welcome. Thank you for joining us and participating in today's webinar. We really appreciate your time, and we're very looking forward to your participation. We also have Q&A session by the end of the presentation. So feel free to leave on comments any kind of questions you have, whether you're joining us from Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, just wherever you're tuning in from. Feel free to leave us comments and questions, and our social media team will deliver the questions and I will relay it to our speakers of the day. So my name is Denisa once again, and I will be today's moderator for the very interesting topic that we will discuss today, which is how you can help make the world free of hunger and food insecurity. So in today's session, I think we have two very special guests, our speakers, joining us from Argentina, our American speaker. Hello, Mr. Joel Burke. How are you doing?
Hola, buenos dias, hello.
Hi, I know I cannot continue unless it's in English. So thank you for joining us. I know it's very early.
I can't, no puedo continuar. I can't continue in Spanish. My Spanish is horrible, so we'll try it in English.
All right, then. So thank you for joining us very early in the morning for you. It's a very special honor for everyone here to have you here with us. And we're very much looking forward to your insights and interesting stories behind Hunger Free America, which is a movement in the US. And Mr. Joel Burke here is the CEO of Hunger Free America. So I'll get back to you in a bit, as I would like to welcome our second speaker, Mbak atau Kakak Eva Bahtiar. Hello, Kak Eva.
Hi, Mbak Denisa.
Hello, Mbak Eva here is the founder and the CEO at Garda Pangan, which is an Indonesian movement for food surplus. And then also, I think it will be more interesting for Mbak Eva to explain it herself. So thank you so much for joining us, Mbak Eva, in today's opportunity. We're very much looking forward to your wonderful presentation and discussion. All right, I think for today's session, there will be one presentation and one explanation from each of our speakers, and then we will have a short discussion with both of them as you can learn and study the differences, the similarities between how American movements and Indonesian movements doing it together to make the world free of hunger and food insecurity, excuse me. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Joel Burke. Mr. Burke, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. You can hear me okay?
Yes, very clearly.
I'm coming to you I'm actually visiting Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile on a trip. And I'll get back to that in a minute. And just a little preview on your trivia question. It's a very challenging question, almost a trick question, because two of those states have among the highest food insecurity and hunger rates in the United States, and really depends on the year and depends on the definition of hunger. But I will say, one of my messages today is about hunger in the developing in the developed world, depending on how you define that, I'd say the world where a lot of wealth, the United States has a lot more hunger than people understand. Even before the pandemic, 35 million Americans lived in homes that couldn't afford enough food. And that's how we define food insecurity. In the pandemic, it rose to 37 million. It would have risen far higher had we not had a massive investment of federal funds due to President Biden and the Democrats in Congress. I'm not being partisan in any way, shape, or form, just factual. The Democrats support it. The Republicans almost universally opposed it. But regarding the trivia question, every hunger, places like South Dakota or Vermont, maybe 1 out of 15 or 1 out of 20 people have food insecurity. In the states with the highest hunger, you'll hear later, places, not to give too much of a hint, like Mississippi and New Mexico, maybe 1 out of 7 people suffer from hunger. And the truth is that we have far more hunger than other countries, such as in Northern or Western Europe, even per capita. And so the hungriest neighborhood in Stockholm or Copenhagen has far less hunger than the least hungry part the least hungry part of the United States has far more hunger than the hungriest part of Copenhagen or Stockholm, because Scandinavia, based on their policies, has essentially ended hunger in those countries. So I'm not going to talk much about hunger in developing countries, in lower income countries. There are many causes of that. There is, obviously poverty, but there's also war. There's also civil war. There's also drought, which is often aided by climate change and global warming. There's also, in general, a lack of food supply. But even in most of those countries, even when you see, over the last few decades, famines in places like, Ethiopia or mass, repeated, malnutrition in places like North Korea, the elites, the rich, even in famine countries, aren't starving. Let me be clear, the rich, even in famine countries, aren't starving. It's the poor people is starving. And so a lot divides the United States and other developed countries then, from the developing world. But one thing is clear, that the one thing unites this issue in developing countries and non-developed countries is that people who are poor, people who are hungry, just do not have the political power they need to get ahead. India has, for instance, has a lot of wealth, and there are countries that have higher hunger rates than India and higher food insecurity rates than India, but because it has so many people in it, it has the largest number of food insecure and hungry people in the world. And even India exports a lot of food. So, hunger really isn't about, do we have enough food? It's about, do low-income people have enough political power to be able to, have the government policies or social policies, the economic policies to be able to afford enough food. Back to the United States, the minimum wage, the lowest that you're allowed to pay people under federal law, it varies a bunch by states, but in a bunch of states, it's $7.25 an hour, US dollars, which equals, if you're working full-time for a year, maybe, $20,000 a year. And if you pay, even in a low-income neighborhood, you could pay $2,000 US dollars a year for rent. That means you're paying $24,000 a year for rent. And so if you're paying $4,000 a year more for rent than you're earning in income, enough money to pay for childcare. We have I can say, and let me say, since this is an international audience, I love my country very much. There's a lot to recommend America, our freedom of speech, our freedom of press, even, with difficulties of certain people trying to undermine democracy. We continue with a democracy. I love American jazz, and hamburgers are great throughout the world. that were refined in America, but our social systems stink. And we allow people to go hungry, even though we have over 400 or 500 billionaires. The two wealthiest people alone in the world, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, they have hundreds of billions of dollars between them, more than enough. That's just those two people to end hunger in America. And so they create an ideology. Well, poor people aren't working hard enough. They don't know how to use their money well enough. They don't know how to shop well enough. And that's all an excuse to get away from the reality is they're not paying their workers enough. And there's a not adequate safety net. We do have some social programs like the food, used to be called the food stamps program, now called the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, that spent over 100 billion US dollars this year. But again, that's less, that fed tens of millions of Americans, and then that's less than one person has in the bank. I should be clear, I'm a capitalist. Our opportunity capitalism, where people work hard and play by the rules, and there's social support, like Scandinavia, where businesses by and large are still owned by the private sector, but there is social support, is the best system. There have been plenty of failed communist systems with a lot of hunger, and the Soviet Union, and China in previous decades, certainly in Cuba or Venezuela. So I think that the answer really is to continue to have private businesses, but to make sure there's a safety net and to make sure there's regulation of those private businesses so they have to pay a living wage. And let me just say, hunger in America and most developed countries isn't people starving. Isn't people going weeks and weeks with no food at all. It's people getting less healthy, less expensive food. It's people choosing between food breakfast and is unacceptable. And do I?
Hello?
Can you still hear me? Okay.
Mr. Bird?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I seem to have been locking up on the screen. Can you still hear me?
Yes, but it got cut off like now and then, but it's fine now. It's
okay. Let me just say what last I'll close because I want to leave plenty of time for questions. Is the
Sure.
real issue is that we need to build the social movement here and in the United States and everywhere for the masses of people to pressure their government to say it's unacceptable in the modern world to have hunger. In the United States, we used to have child labor. I know many countries in the world still have child labor. We had a social movement that said it's not acceptable to have child labor. Kids should be in school. They shouldn't be working. And we need a social movement to say everyone needs enough food. It's a basic human right. Here in the United States and in Chile, Uruguay and Argentina, where I am, where there's a lot of wealthy people, but also a lot of poverty. This really is a universal problem. It's not because of food, it's because of power or lack of power. Thank you. And I look forward to the other presentations and then taking questions.
Thank you very much for the wonderful, I would say, explanation about how the issue is raising in the US. And in a bit, I think we might probably going to hear what can be the difference or what can be the similarities of how we experiencing things in Indonesia. And I'm very much looking forward to hear it from our speakers here, Mbak Eva. Mbak Eva, I think the screen is yours, and feel free to share a screen for your presentation. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor for me to be able to meet you all virtually. Thank you, Ms. Denisa, for introducing me. Hi, Mr. Joel. I learned so much from your explanations. I'm Eva Batiar, founder and CEO of Garda Pangan, and here is our tagline: "Why Benefit if you can feed people in need?" So today I'm going to share about what we have been doing in Garda Pangan as a social enterprise that's working on food loss and food waste issue in Indonesia. So yeah, in Indonesia, food waste is a serious problem that is not as much discussed and addressed. Maybe not many of us are even aware that Indonesia is actually one of the countries that produce biggest food loss and waste. The ranks keeps changing over the years, but still we are one of the biggest producer. And then of course, food waste means, tremendous negative impacts to many sectors. It surely create a huge economic loss. And then in terms of its serious environmental impact, our food loss also contributes to 7 to 8% of our greenhouse gas emissions. But then, yeah, what hits me the most is that food waste is also an irony, as on the other side, 19.4 millions of people in Indonesia still struggle for food every day and still go to bed hungry. And millions of Indonesia also suffer from malnutrition and stunting. So that's one of the reasons why we came up with Garda Pangan. We just think, why don't we bridge the gap between those with food surplus and those who need them the most? So Garda Pangan is a social enterprise with two main goals: food waste and loss eradications, but also at the same time, hunger relief. And the way we work is following a simple guidance called food recovery hierarchy. It shows us the order of priority on how best to sustainably consume our food and keep it from ending up in our landfills. So as you can see here, the most favorable action is surely to reduce food waste from the very beginning. But then should we have any leftover based on the chart, the next priority is to donate the edible one to the people so it can serve its initial purpose to feed human. And once the food is no more edible, and then the next priority is to use it for animal feeds, industrial uses, and lastly to composting. So here is a glimpse of what our organization looks like. It is quite unique. As a one side, we work as a food bank whose main purpose is to serve the people while reducing food loss and waste. But then in order to have a sustainable and independent funding to run the food bank, we have also a couple of business units. They are all still related to food loss and waste reductions, but then all profits generated would be used to, again, to provide operational funding. So here are some of our activities in our food bank, or what we call food rescue. That literally means rescuing surplus food so that they don't end up as waste. So what we do is basically tackling the food waste and loss issue from its biggest source. And one of them is from hospitality industries and food businesses. So the way we work is by having a partnership with restaurants, hotels, cafes, retailers, and so on. Because unfortunately, food waste is still considered as necessary evil in this sector, meaning that producing food waste is still considered as inevitable process. And that is why generally wasting food is considered as the easiest, as the cheapest, and the fastest option to get rid of their surplus food. Even though most of the time they are still a safe and wholesome food. So in Garda Pangan, we provide two types of sustainable and responsible food waste management. The first one is to rescue the edible surplus food. And then the second one is to handle the organic scrap from spoiled or expired food that will be managed in our organic waste treatment. So this way we are able to become a one-stop food waste solution that keep our food away from ending up in landfill. And then in surplus food donation scheme, we pick up the unsold foods that is still in a perfectly edible conditions that were otherwise go to waste, and we distribute them instead to those who are food insecure. So we pick up the food on the arranged schedule, and then of course run the quality check, sort and pack them if necessary, and then send them right away to the people in need. Here are some of our partners. There are total 37 partners joining us in Surabaya. And then here is the example of our monthly report to our partners to make them comfortable to donate. So we try to create a transparent and accountable system so they know exactly who gets the product, the profile of the recipients, and how many people are helped directly by their surplus food. And then the next thing that we do, not only picking up foods from businesses, we also rescue food from the big events like weddings, conference, festivals, you name it, that used to involve huge amount of food. So in this case, we also have a partnership with wedding organizers and catering service. So basically, people can request us to pick up the surplus food from their events. And no, believe it or not, we used to rescue up to 500 portions of food from one single lavish wedding in Surabaya. And then another source of food loss is from the farmer's field. So what we do is something that we call gleaning, which is gathering leftover fruits, vegetables, or other produce to tackle the food loss from the farmer's field. We call it gleaning, but it's basically the same as other food rescue, only we're rescuing them directly on the farmer's field. So this usually happens on the peak harvest season where commodity prices plunge significantly, that even the selling price would not cover the harvesting costs. So farmers tend to choose to leave the produce rotting on the field without harvesting them. So in this picture, for instance, is when we were gleaning the cabbage in East Java, because the price plunged from 3,000 per kilograms to only 150 per kilogram. So farmers chose to not harvest the cabbage. So that's what we pick up as well. And of course, there's a campaign, also policy advocacy to the government. And we currently have 155 locations of direct beneficiaries all over Surabaya. So in Garda Pangan, we do not use any third parties or something like that. We distribute the food directly to the people. And each one of the locations has been carefully assessed and surveyed and selected based on our target criteria, such as poor families, disabled, homeless, elderly persons, shelter, foster care, refugees, and so on. And since our operations in June 2017, Garda Pangan has rescued 30,667,000 portions of food, sorry, and 76 of them, 76% of them comes from the food recovery, and then the rest from donation. And it equals with 99 tons of potential food waste, and we serve 25,000 undernourished beneficiaries and still counting. Yep, I think that's all a brief introduction to Garda Pangan, and maybe I'll be happy to discuss further in next session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ma Eva, for the wonderful presentation. We're going to have a short discussion with both of the speakers in just a few minutes. But before that, I would like to remind all of the audiences, whether you're tuning in from YouTube or Instagram or Zoom or Facebook, feel free to leave any of your questions, something you're curious about our speakers, and especially about the movements that both of them are doing right now. So feel free to leave any comments. Our social media team will deliver the questions and I will relay it to our speakers by the end of the session. Okay. So I would like to welcome back Mr. Berg and also Mbak Eva. Probably we're going to have a discussion in just a few minutes, because I have been noting some interesting facts from both of your explanations. So let's see if there will be like much more insights that you can share with us. So for both of your presentation, even though there might be differences in how Garda Pangan and also Hunger Free America are doing their movements, I can definitely highlight that food is actually not the issue, because it's actually like a reflection from different layers of problems. It can be social problems, financial problems, health problems, environmental problems. And I think Mr. Joel also highlighted and mentioned that this can be something that probably our government should be on duty about. So what I'm very interested in knowing further is probably for all those years, both Garda Pangan and also Hunger Free America has been doing this what would be the biggest challenges that keep you like one step away from achieving your vision and mission? Because we understand that both of these movements are grassroots. It's coming from a problem, and then you try to figure out the solutions, and you deliver the solutions. You provide it to our to the people. But what would be, if I may know, the biggest challenges that each of you might have, and over the years that you've been doing this? Probably, I would go to Mr. Berg first.
Okay, and please call me Joel. If she's Ava, I'm Joel.
Oh,
We believe in
Joel.
gender. Our group, we believe in gender equity. If she goes by the first name, I go there first. Anyway, can I ask her a question? You first. You said, first of all, very impressive presentation. I used to be in charge of food recovery and gleaning for the federal government. I work with of the United States. I work with many food recovery and gleaning groups, and I have two messages. Number one is they do really, really, really important work. They're feeding people that wouldn't be fed. But two, let's be frank, they're only scratching the surface. So Ava, you said you served about 26,000 people, correct?
Yep, in Surabaya only.
That's amazing. And how many people do you think are food insecure in Indonesia? Tens of millions, correct, or more?
19.4 millions.
Right. And so I think there's, and again, I'm not critical of you and your amazing group in any way, shape, or form, but sometimes the government officials point to groups like yours or point to food banks in America and say, hey, we're solving the problem. And the food banks are far bigger in the United States, but they're just a small percentage of the solution as well. You're feeding 26,000 people in a country, where tens of millions of people don't have enough food. And it's, and you never know on any day what food the caterers are going to get. You never know on any day what the restaurants are going to get. Gleaning is very seasonal. It only happens once in a while, and I like eating every day and knowing what I'm going to eat every day. So that, to answer the question, the challenge is the powers that be want to give the impression, Ava's group or food banks in the United States, and I've written a paper how problematic it is that food banks are growing across the country, across the developed world. At the same time, governments are cutting back on wage protections, are cutting back on worker protections, cutting back on the social safety net, and then using the charities as an excuse to undercut, the safety net. On the other hand, groups like food banks or AVA are even more effective. I'm glad to see you do advocacy, because when you say, look, we're doing everything, you say the charity should do, we're doing everything we can. We're doing this, this, and this. We're gleaning, we're getting food from caterers, we're getting food, from restaurants and food stores, and still we're only scratching the surface. It's really, really an important message. So that's our greatest, challenge, having to convince people that charity is not the answer. If we feel threatened militarily, we don't have a little community fundraiser. If a bridge goes down in an earthquake, we don't have a little community fundraiser. We say these are important national priorities. We need to fix it. When there's a pandemic, the federal government, buys, vaccines because the pandemic crosses state lines or even international lines, and we need a national response. So long answer to your question, that's what keeps me up at night, and that's what keeps us from ending hunger in America. And when our political system was working better in the 1970s, when we had more support from the two political parties, we almost did end hunger in America. But starting in the Reagan era in the 1980s, our government started blaming poor people for poverty, started, shipping jobs overseas with far lower, wages. I'm glad there are jobs in Asia, but they often pay far, far, far less than the United States. We need international wage protections, and then cutting social programs for poor people. So that's why we have this problem. And in the recent decades, as partisanship has gotten worse in the United States, hunger's gotten worse.
Yep, Joel, agree, absolutely agree. I believe that food bank is not and never will be the sole solution to hunger issue. And we see our position as a food bank. We're only food recovery organizations, meaning that we rescue and recover the food that is potentially lost from the supply chain and business process, which happens to be huge in Indonesia. And we distribute them to communities who need them the most. But that's the thing that we do. We never claim that we do more than that. And I also see some of the differences of food bank in Indonesia and in US as well. I came to Silicon Valley Food Bank, I think 3 years ago, and I was amazed by their operation. I mean, they were huge. And we are Indonesia, we really start from the ground. I think Indonesia, there are only like 3 or 4 food banks. So we just started in Indonesia, and we start from getting the potential food loss and waste. But I mean, it doesn't stop us to do anything more than that. So I'm very impressed with what you're doing. You absolutely doing much more to solve the hunger issues. And we see our position as a food recovery organizations, and we also believe that we are not the sole solutions to hunger problems.
And the other unfortunate news is the more you help farmers and businesses identify where food waste is, over time, they are going to reduce their food waste.
Yeah.
That's certainly what's happens in the United States. So your effectiveness will actually harm you over time. I hate to say, and I'm a big supporter of food recovery. That food waste hierarchy, I don't know if that originally came from the U.S. government. I helped write that when I was in the U.S. government, decades ago. And also reducing food waste is really important for the environment. We have limited landfill space. In New York City, where I usually live, we transport some of our food waste hundreds of miles away. There's a tremendously horrible environmental impact on that. So there are lots of good reasons in Indonesia and the United States to reduce food waste, including feeding hungry people.
Yep. We actually get a lot of similar questions. I mean, people asking us questions like, do you actually wish there are more food waste so you could distribute more food? And our answer, of course, no. We actually assist our partners to reduce their food waste. So by providing them the data of their food loss and waste that they produce, and it's actually also their economic loss. So, I mean, in one of our bakery, when we first partnered with them, they used to produce like 200 portions of cake every single day. But then maybe because they're doing it every single day, they're become, I don't know what, more accustomed to seeing the food waste, but never really pay attention that it actually, it's also economic loss for them. So when we're providing them the data, they see that, and then they choose to to improve their operation process. And then it turns out maybe after 2 or 3 months they produce only like 20 to 30, and that's a good news for us, because once again our root spirit of our movement is actually the environmental problems. Solving hunger issue is like additional benefits for us, honestly. So, and I think maybe at one point, if all of the businesses produce no more food loss and waste, I think that's the point that we no longer need Garda Pangan, and that's the main goal. And maybe we can start doing something else to solve the hunger issues from other perspective. But yeah, I absolutely agree with almost everything that you said, Mr. Joel. It's also the perspective that I really pay attention here in Indonesia.
All right. Yeah, thank you. I will change how I address both of you. So thank you, Ava and Joel, for the wonderful discussion. Now, for me personally, it raised like another question, because I kind of like intrigued by a statement by Joel earlier saying that food scarcity or food problems, hunger issues, is not about people starving. It's about food being unavailable or food being unhealthy, food being unaffordable. Is that true? That's how the reality is in the US? And is it different here in Indonesia that people are actually not starving? Or are people starving here in Indonesia, Eva? What do you think?
Is it for me?
Yeah, probably Joel first. Just like to clarify if my statement
So again, I was talking about the United States, that, we do have some safety net. We do have, for kids that go to school, 29 million kids a day that go to school get free lunches at school. and half of them get school breakfast. Now, school's only in 180 days out of the year, but those 180 days out of the year, most poor kids are getting at least a lunch or a breakfast. That's not nearly, enough. We do have the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the SNAP program that used to be called the Food Stamps Program, that's giving, benefits, sometimes hundreds of dollars, US dollars worth of food a month to low income, families. So we do have, fairly significant, safety nets. We have different programs for elderly people who are hungry. We have a different program for pregnant women and children under 5. We have a different program for kids over the summer, and those are all government programs. And then there is this, fairly large food bank and food pantry and soup kitchen charitable network. So this wasn't always the case. A woman named Frances Perkins, very significant woman in US history, was the first female cabinet secretary under President Roosevelt in the 30s. When she was a young woman in 1910, wrote a master's degree thesis on hunger in New York City. And kids were starving there. It would be like in the developing world, but then there were no government programs. There was no government, safety nets. So I haven't spent a lot of time in developing countries, but in those a lot longer time without eating. I've never been to Indonesia, but I've certainly been I've been to Thailand and India and even Australia has is more similar to the United States with food insecurity, but some of those other countries literally people go very significant periods of time without food. And I'll let you guys speak to Indonesia since I've never been there. Although if you want to invite me to give this talk in person, I'm dying to see your lovely country. From Jakarta to Bali, I've got my bags packed.
Yeah, and probably Surabaya because that's where Garda Pangan is currently based at. Okay, thank you, Joel, for that. So Eva, what do you think about this phenomenon? Are Indonesians really hungry, like most of them? You mentioned that many people are going to bed hungry. Is there any difference about the phenomenon and the situation?
Yeah, first of all, before I forgot, just to respond to what Joel said before, in Indonesia, we don't really have a very good food assistance program. There are some food aid programs, but it's only for staple food like rice, cooking oil, and something like that. And there are a lot of troubles in the executions on the ground. So in terms of food bank and something like that, there's nothing that people can expect if they go hungry at that day. But to answer Dennis's questions, are the people really hungry in Indonesia? I see the phenomenon that there are still differences in people living in urban poverty and in rural poverty because they're very different. People living in rural areas, even if they are so poor, they basically still can eat maybe 2-3 times a day because people help each other over there. And people usually rely on agriculture sectors. So even if they don't have any money, they basically still can eat. But that's not the thing with people living in urban poverty because they basically rely on usually most of them working in informal sectors. They depend on the daily income. So once they do not get enough income for the day, they have to, really struggle to get the food. And that's the thing when I said people go to bed hungry. So usually what they do is they share the food with the family, but with very little portion. Or they only eat 1 or 2 times per day. That's what we usually see in the urban poverty, especially in Surabaya.
Can I ask, does Indonesia have any program to give meals to children at school? Or do they have to take food from home?
No, we don't have any daily food assistance program.
Yeah, so that's one thing I hope you can push your government to do. When I worked for the US government in the 1990s, one of the things the US government did is help other countries develop, school meals programs. And even people who are conservative, who don't think you should be feeding adults, I disagree with that, but I understand that philosophy. Many of them believe, well, at least we should feed children. And the other part is there a problem in Indonesia that boys are more likely to complete school than girls?
Yes, there is.
And so feeding kids at school also helps deal with that, because if the girls go to school, they're fed and they're no longer sort of a weight on the family. Their benefit to that. So school meals programs are not only a good way to reduce child hunger and reduce burdens on poor families, but also they really boost child equity. And they tend to, gender equity, and they tend to be cheaper than broader based, programs that distribute food. They're a little easier to reduce corruption in, because the food is there and distributed on site. And I'd love to follow up with you otherwise, and whether we could even start an international movement. And I've been talking to people in some other countries about really, if nothing else, let's start with free meals for every kid in the world.
So are you saying that you were also included in the people who advocated policy years before in the US? And what did you exactly do?
So 20 years I've worked for this organization, where a nonprofit, as you call it in America, most people around the world call it an NGO, a non-governmental organization. So we lobby the government for policies, but we also carry out some programs on behalf of the government's. For that, for 8 years, I did work as a senior official in the United States Department of Agriculture. And so I worked directly for the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. I was what's called a political appointee of President Clinton. That I came in when President Clinton became president and left when he left the presidency, but I was at the U.S. Department of Agriculture for all 8 years. And I worked mostly on hunger programs, but also worked on this idea of national service, sort of a domestic Peace Corps, where people, mostly young people, would work a year or two, get a small amount of money for community service, and then get some money to pay for college. So that's a little bit, about my background, and I came for this work. I will say, when I worked for the government and said, well, government's really the ultimate solution, people said, oh, you're biased because you work for the government. If you leave the government and go to a real job, you won't feel that way. And now, I worked for government for 8 years, and now I've worked for an NGO in 20 years. And I feel that way even, more strong. Government's not the only answer. And again, sometimes government goes overboard, right? And government restrictions on prices and other things often, fail. So I'm just talking about a proper balance between the role of the state and the role of the private sector. And the private sector is really good at some things. Efficiency. The private sector is generally far more efficient than government, but government's usually better at equity, making sure everyone is covered by something. And that's, based on my view in both sectors, we need that balance. Did that answer your question?
Yep. But you're surely in a very solid positions to advocate such kind of policy. In Indonesia, I think it's very harder to advocate such strong policy if we do not have solid foundations in the grassroots. So I think that's what we're trying to do. Garapangan is only 4 years old, Mr. Joel. So
and I'm not saying you're supposed to solve this on your own.
Yeah,
and
sure.
One other thing, most Americans are ignorant of Indonesia. I know a little, and I know it's the largest Muslim country. On the planet. Not everyone there is Muslim, but most people are. You have more people who follow Islam than any country on the planet. And as you know, a central component of Islam is feeding people. And it's not just about charity, it's about social justice. So I think you have a very strong economic argument to make to people, a strong moral statement to make to people. And there are also, Christians and Buddhists and others there, all those, religions, teach us that we need to do something serious, not just charity, but really social justice. So I think this is a priority.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Joel and Eva, for such wonderful discussion. And also, probably we will let Joel know, Eva, that in Indonesia, the government has assistance program, but it's probably not very, I would say it's very in the surface. We have the something that we call BLT, or dana langsung, bantuan langsung tunai. So they give in cash. and in hope that each household will manage that amount of cash to have a proper living. But somehow, sometimes, or if I'm not saying most of the times, the government forget that when they provide rice, they provide the oil, they forgot to provide the gas. So they cannot really cook the meal. That's like a very, very real situation what we have in here. But we also we also understand and we also get the point when you say that it's going to involve like so many stakeholders. It is almost impossible for the government to do everything and solve everything on their own. And this is also one of the reasons why both of your organizations are trying to be the extension of the governments, being the grassroots, starting the movement, starting from the real issues what you have in your environment and providing solutions. And hopefully, it's such a wonderful, I would say, it's a very fruitful discussion you just had earlier. And I think most of our audiences, they can also highlight the differences between how Indonesians are dealing with hunger, like how we define hunger in our own, and how Americans probably define it like from different perspectives. Before we go further with the discussion, I would like to deliver a question coming from our online audience. This is from Zoom. His name is BJ Swamintaya. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And his or her questions, I'm sorry about that. The main reason of hunger, which hit the world at this moment, is because of lack of the young people, probably, yeah, the young people to the agriculture. They prefer to get a job in the offices, which are more comfortable. Do you have any suggestion to make them return to the nature of exploring nature? I think this is related to the agriculture thing. So probably, Eva, would you like to answer this first? What do you think about more young people are just going to the city, working back in the office and the back of the laptop and not doing the farming thing anymore? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I can see that that's the real problem and the real challenge in our agriculture sector right now. The average of the farmers' age working in our farmers' field is actually 50 to 60 years old. And there is not much regenerations because their children usually tends to not wanting to become a farmers. But stating that it is the very main reasons of hunger issue is, I think, is also not correct, because I think hunger is a very complex problem, and there is no single and easy solution to it. But of course, yeah, that's one of the problem. But in Indonesia, based on the research, actually we produce a lot more food than what we consume. So the food availability actually is not really a problem, but the access to the food and then the stability, maybe that's another problem. But of course, I agree. We have to, encourage more young people to also work in the agriculture sector, because I think at some point in the future we would not have any more farmers, and that would be a problem. But I cannot blame them for not wanting to be farmers, because the situations is also not very favorable for them. For example, farmers in Indonesia usually had more loss rather than the profits because of the situation, the price fluctuations, the climate crisis now also exacerbates pest attacks. The harvest failure becomes much more frequent than before, and I know that because I also work as agriculture consultant for a few years in East Indonesia. So yeah, I think actually the only solution for that is to create a great ecosystem so that the farmers can thrive, and that's only maybe the most vital positions to do that is the government, I guess. We also need to very improve our distribution channel of the food, because as you can see, every time there is harvesting seasons, the price drops very significantly. And that happens from like decades ago, and we never have a solution for that. So yeah, I think that would be my answer, Mbak Delisa.
Yeah, thank you, Eva, for the explanation. Now, probably, Joel, you have your point of view?
Yeah, and let me say with all due respect, if the person who asked the question is available in the afternoon of a work week, they're probably not a farmer. And farming is very difficult, often dangerous, backbreaking, underpaid work. And so I'm not saying the questioner is doing this. I want to be careful. I'm not blaming the victim, but it's your fault if you'd prefer to have a professional job in an office in the city, rather than, work as a farmer. And, as each year Indonesia gets more developed, I suspect more and more farming is going to be mechanized like it has in the United States. And you just need far fewer people to do that work. In the United States, we have a lot of land, but it's all owned by people and owned by corporations, usually, or very wealthy, people. So it's not just like your average poor person could move to a rural, area and then grow their own food. And then even if you did grow your own food, again, where's the money for the fuel money for, the rent, etc. Rural areas have some of the highest areas of poverty in the United States. So in a modern society, fewer and fewer people do individual jobs. I did not build my iPhone. Someone else built my iPhone, and I do this job so I can earn money to buy the iPhone. And we have to realize that not everyone's going to be able to grow their own food.
Yeah. Thank you, Joel, for your explanation. You'd like to respond, Eva?
Yeah, sorry, Mbak Denisa. Yeah, if I can add, and also in Indonesia, the average land position of one farmer is very small. It gets smaller and smaller as it passes from generation to generations. So currently in Indonesia, the average land ownership is only 1/4 of the hectares. So that's very small. And the farming process in Indonesia is very labor intensive. So not like in US, I know that one farmers can own like hectares of land and it's all very mechanized. In Indonesia, it's very small land. A lot of people works on it. At one side, of course, it's good as people in village like working together and something like that. But it also only leaves very small profit for the farmers. And not to mention if they have to suffer the loss, if the price fluctuates, if price drops when the harvesting seasons come. So yeah, it's very complicated to be the farmers in Indonesia.
Yeah, I agree totally. Because in Indonesia, in the past, we all remember when we were students in probably elementary school, we all know Indonesia is an agriculture country. We all know farmings, and especially for rice is like the main or the major industry in Indonesia. But I think, as far as I remember, I've never really seen like farmers are having a very, proper living, for example, because they're farming other people's land. It's not like the land that they own and they make money out of it. And then another issues when they have like the produce that they have, and then it's being like the price is just too far from the market. Back again to the cycle of how the ecosystem works in Indonesia, it's a lot of homework. And I believe that more, if not being a farmer, more Indonesian youth especially are realizing this phenomenon and seeing it from a different perspective, not only as a problem for the environmental, I believe, and also there's a potential in there, especially when it comes to making a better living for farmers. And probably by the end of the day, eventually, more and more young people are more interested in doing the farming because there's a lot of potential we have here. So thank you so much for that explanation. And
can I just add,
yeah, feel free.
There's a lot of risk to farming. You have to put, your labor up front. You have to get the land up front. You have to put the fertilizer and the seeds up front. Then you can have too much rain, no crop. Too little rain, no crop. Too much heat, no crop. Probably not in Indonesia, too little to eat, but in other places too cold. You probably don't get frost, there, but plenty of parts of the world is, a landslide, and you lose your land. So, not only is it tough in a good year, there are many, many bad years, and you have no way of predicting that.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. The geographical situation also has important roles, but I remember that Eva mentioned about being an agriculture consultant in the eastern part of Indonesia, because I also had a current project in Flores, actually, where there are a lot of the main job for the farmers are their horticulture farmers. And just by a very small, very tiny small intervention from the government, it really changes their lives, meaning that they have not been exposure to all the technologies they have. Just a very small thing can have a very huge impact, because they just used to live to how their great grandparents do the farming. So I think it's a very huge potential, but at the same time, also homework for not only the government, but also everybody and organization, just like Garda Pangan, that utilizes like lots of things only to solve the food problems, food waste issues, but there are a lot of potentials that we can do in there. And by the end of the day, eventually also to create more job opportunities in the green industries as well. So thank you for that. I think the question from I think BJ is the name, Swamintaya. I think it was a very short question, but it has very long explanation. It correlates to each other. So thank you for that wonderful question as well. As we are waiting for more questions from our online audience, and now I would like to ask questions for both of you, to both of the speakers. Is there anything that changes before and after the pandemic? We've been in this pandemic for 2 years, and I'm pretty sure more and more people are having financial issues and problems. Well, at the same time, there are also people who make more money during the pandemic. We have to admit that. But in general, is there any difference or any changes that happen because of the pandemic when it comes to food insecurity or hunger issues? Probably Joel first.
So, the pandemic was a two-edged sword in America, because it created more attention to hunger and more money to hunger, but also gave people the false impression that the only reason we had hunger was because of, the pandemic. And so it's very important to note that we had a massive hunger problem before the pandemic that swept under the rug. And then when people say, oh, it's a new problem, it's sort of, it has class implications and racial implications, because, while the largest number of people in America who are hungry are ethnically white, African Americans, Black people, people of Hispanic, Latinx, Spanish-speaking heritage, and, Asian Americans. We do have a fairly large Asian population, particularly, Chinese immigrant, population, some Filipino and Korean, Vietnamese as well. And even in some spots, Indonesian and Malaysian, but not much compared to other places. That, the message was, well, now that white people are hungry, it's a serious issue. When other people were hungry, it was less of a serious issue. So I'm glad we got more money and more attention. But what happens is it ripped the bandages off our society that covered up the festering wounds that we had. And as I said, before the pandemic, we had 35 million Americans who didn't earn enough money to get the food they need. And what happened in the pandemic is, jobs went away literally within days. Even in the Great Depression of the 1930s, there was a 3-year gap between the collapse of the stock market and the bottoming out of the US economy, or the highest unemployment rate. So most depressions take weeks or months or years to destroy jobs. This literally destroyed jobs in literally weeks, when much of the US economy just shut down. As I mentioned, and so the top way people buy food is money to earn food. They no longer had that money. And we have some systems to provide unemployment compensation when people are unemployed, but there are a lot of holes in that system. It's inadequate. So we had that. People didn't have the money. Then schools, as I said, 29 million kids a day were getting lunches through schools. Half of those kids were also getting breakfast through those schools free, went away overnight. Then we have centers for senior citizens, for elderly people, those closed. And then, some of the charities that were feeding hungry people, closed. So all the bad things could happen at once. Again, I'm not being, partisan. I'm just being factual. When President Trump was president in the beginning of that, he did one high-profile program that had a lot of corruption in it, where he just gave out food with his name on it and basically said, vote for me because of this. And people found that was a violation of the law later. But very little was done. When the Democrats got in charge, they did provide over $100 billion, billion dollars in food aid, and they also gave out cash. And I want to reinforce the importance of giving out cash, because most low-income people do know what to do with the money. They just don't have enough of it. And so that's what's changed. Now that the elites are back, and even though we still have more waves of COVID because of treatments and vaccinations, the death rate, at least among vaccinated people, has gone down dramatically. So the elites want to declare victory and say the pandemic's over. It's not. They want to say that the hunger crisis is over. It's not. So that's going back to the problem. We still have massive denial in our country. Any of you have listened even to this part of the presentation so far probably now know more about hunger in America than most Americans who aren't hungry. Obviously, the tens of millions of Americans who are hungry understand it, but this is basically never in the US news media. You find a lot more about Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. I assume that got news even in Indonesia. It got big news here in Argentina. I'm laughing. There's a huge war going on in Europe. The previous president of the United States may be indicted for felonies, and the biggest news is two stars getting into a fight. Is that news in Indonesia? You're smiling. I assume it is.
It's huge. It's sometimes it's just like in a few minutes, it's just bigger than the most important issues in Indonesia. It's huge. Okay. So yeah, thank you, Joel, for that. Eva, any comments about the pandemic, how pandemic impacts the hunger and food scarcity situation in Indonesia?
Yeah, I think just like in everywhere else in the world, it also hits everyone in Indonesia. Millions of people lost their job. But again, the underprivileged community is the one most affected disproportionately. In Indonesia, as we all know, the majority of labor force are in informal employment. So when all the business shut down, then the street vendors, cab drivers, motorcycle drivers, and others simply lost their daily income. And Indonesia, it turns out that in underprivileged communities, they spend actually 60% of their income to buy food. So imagine when their main and only income is gone, they automatically become food insecure. Maybe some of them are lucky to have a few savings to help them to survive, but I think maybe not for a very long period of time. So yeah, these are the people who cannot also enjoy the privilege of working at home. So they continued going outside to work, and that's why consequently become more exposed to COVID-19. So this is like a vicious circle, and it continue happen for quite some time. And we also found that some of the vulnerable communities, like disabled, transgender communities, are also severely impacted. As we discussed before, there are some forms of social assistance available from the government, but very, very many troubles on the ground. And then we also see, because we also connect with a lot of farmers in East Java, we also found that the case of crop price plummet happen more and more frequently as their usual distribution channel are also affected by the pandemic. So this means the farmers are also suffering more and more loss, and we had to do gleaning more often in the pandemic. So that's why in this pandemic situation, Gadapan actually, we have to work harder to provide the help as much as we can. Maybe not as much as that we hope, but we try to do as much as we can. And then in response to the pandemic situation, the way we operate also changed, because almost all of our partners halt their business. The hotels were closed, or even if they continue to operate, usually they reduce the capacity very significantly. So this affected our source of surplus food. So at the same time, we knew that these are the times that people get more vulnerable and needs help. But then, thanks to the solidarity of the people, we are able to raise a huge amount of donations in form of money, staple foods, hot meals, fresh produced milks, and so on. And then a lot of communities joining us as well. There are local businesses here in Surabaya that allocate some of the percentage of their income to us. Farmers joining, food industries, catering service, students donating to us, and individuals. So I think, yeah, it's a disaster, but also at the same time we can see that the solidarity of the people getting stronger in Surabaya.
Thank you, Eva. So yeah, I think the pandemic hit everybody equally and differently at the same time. Now that you mentioned about the donation, and I think it can connect to my next question, because Hunger Free America, you have the program for your operation, mainly it's like for your donation program, and I believe it's from the public, it's from the people. And it is a different thing that Garda Pangan does, because the donation form that you receive and you allocate is in a form of food, in a form of crops, probably. My question is, why, or is it possible for, let's say, Hunger Free America to try to do something like that? Or you think, Joel, that donating in cash or donating in money is actually like the most fitted way for Americans to donate? Is it like the easiest way, or is it like the most comfortable way for Americans to do so? Because probably in Indonesia, it is different. And that's the reason why Garda Pangan chose to make a donation in terms of like food or surplus food for the industry. I hope my question.
But I bet Ava, you need money too, right?
Yes, and we also accept money, actually.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, this is your full-time job, correct?
Yep, for the last 2 years.
Yeah, I'm sure you don't make a lot, but you have to pay for you, and you have staff. You have to pay for your office. Do you have a window open or a fan? I'm fascinated by all those papers blowing there. Is it very windy, or is there a fan?
There's a fan. It's very hot.
Okay. And I assume you have to pay for the trucks?
Sure, we buy it by ourselves.
And
No
that's why I
funding
mentioned
from the government.
And NGOs are very well established in like the United States. They're new, relatively new in places like Indonesia, most of them. So the public doesn't necessarily understand that you do need money.
Yep.
And our organization needs money. Now, even though I say food distribution is not the long-term states from charities, there are a very robust program of a national organization called Feeding America. They have 200 food banks that are sort of regional food distribution centers, and then they distribute food to 40 to 60,000 community-based soup kitchens and food pantries around the United States. But even if you want to help them distribute food, it's better to give them money than food, because they buy wholesale, they get donated food, and they pay for the transportation. So even if you don't agree with my solution, which is that the government's got to do more to help people, even if you want charities to do more to help people get food, that's still far more effective to give them, money than food. A dirty little secret in America, I bet this is true for your organization as well. If the amount of food being donated is small enough or far enough away, it's probably cheaper to buy new food than to pick up, a food, a donation. And the food charities hopefully know what people need, what foods they want, whether they're halal, whether they're vegetarian or other things. If you just donate, I think someone needs these beans or this rice, you have no idea whether they have it already, they need it, etc. So even if you're supporting food distribution, you should donate money. But for us, we don't do food distribution. We help sign people up for government programs. We help inform people where resources, are. We place people in nonprofit organizations to build their capacity, and we push our government to do more. We do need money to do that. Not a boatload of money. We spend a few million US dollars a year as a national organization. I took a 40% pay cut to leave the federal government to do this. Rent. So we do need money.
Thank you, Joel.
And we get our money from a mix of the government, from corporations, and from religious groups and from private individuals.
I see. Okay. Thank you for your answers. Any comments or response, Eva, to that?
Yeah, I think the difference here with Indonesia is we cannot hope for the same kind of assistance from the government. So we need to do it all by ourselves. All of our infrastructures, offices, employees, we all we get nothing from the government. Actually, we have to get the money from ourselves. So we have two sources of income. The first one is, of course, we accepting donation, grant, and so on, donations and so on. But also on the other side, and this is simply because we chose this type of organization as a social enterprise, so we are allowed to do the business so that we can, get the profit generated to fund our operation. This is just the way we chose our organization works. I think there's no a problem with that.
All right. Thank you, Eva. Of course, as a social enterprise, to make business and make profit is very important to keep the ball rolling at the same time this is not just like charity or something. You have to keep the ball rolling at the same time.
And if I can say, that kind of thing enables us is actually to reject the donations from the companies, businesses, or institutions that doesn't share the same value with us. We actually reject a lot of companies' donations, and then some political parties also tries to to donate a huge amount of money, and we can say no to that because we have our individual our independent source of funding.
Yeah, it's totally understandable, because in Indonesia, I think ESG is a new trend. It's like more and more corporations are trying to tap into the mandatory point where they need to have a CSR program. Environment, when this is like a huge critical issues, and of course they're trying to tap into your organizations, trying to find like, let's do the win-win part and then make it work together. But at the same time, it is also, I agree that it's very important for an organization, especially an independent one, to keep hold on the value and to make sure that there's no like shifting in terms of like the essence of doing the organization itself. So thank you so much for that explanation, Eva. And thank you also for Joel. I'd like to check with the social media team. Are there any more questions that we have from other platforms, probably? All right. Okay. While we wait for it, I think this can be the last question before we close the whole discussion and the session. What would be the ideal situation? Like how do you see, okay, Garda Pangan can be ideal if this happens or if this condition happens? And also at this also the same question for Hunger Free America, what would be your dream? What would be your ideal situation? Okay, this is what we want to achieve. This is what we would like to have in, I don't know how many years, but your ultimate goal for your organization. Maybe you can share with us. Joel first.
Well, so my goal is to put my organization out of business by ending hunger in America. We're the richest country in the history of the world. Many private jets, and we have tens of millions of people is able to get a job and able to earn enough to feed their family. And for children and people with disabilities and seniors who aren't able to work, we have a government safety net that gives them enough food and money so they're no longer hungry. It's that simple. And I go out of business, and then I, will open up a good street food stand in Jakarta.
And also in Surabaya, because Eva is there.
How many islands do you have? Like thousands of islands, right? Like so I can't go to, but I'll hit the big ones.
17,000, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. What about Garapangan, Eva? What would be your ideal situation?
Yeah, of course. Because Indonesia food bank is actually very new concept. And then we just started actually. I think the very first food bank that we have in Indonesia started in. We are actually one of the pioneer in food bank in Indonesia. We of course realized that maybe we don't have the same capacities that we expected to be, and of course we just starting to to really approaching the potential surplus food that we can rescue. But as I said before, this is not the end. And that's why Gadapangan, we really highlight the environmental problems, issues as our spirit. And the hunger relief is, like the additional benefits of that. So yeah, I agree 100%. I think I heard it somewhere before that hunger isn't caused by scarcity of food. It is a scarcity of democracy. So in solving the hunger problems, I think we need much, much more political and collective actions. I think government plays a very vital role in that. But I think also each one of us and each one of the individuals can also contribute to these pressing issues. Maybe more than we predict, actually. Our action goes a long way. I mean, start buy local, eat local would help our local farmers thrive and boost the local economy. And then eat more diverse food. I think in Indonesia, we rely too much on rice, on one crops. And then, for those who have food businesses, or they work in it, remember that no edible food belongs to the bin. It belongs to the belly. So work with the local food bank. I think solidarity among the communities also plays a vital role. In the end, we need to take care of each other, starting from the very closest circle. And for those who can afford to donate money or something like that, donate your time as volunteers in nearest soup kitchen, food bank, or something like that. Basically, we can do a lot of things as individuals as well.
Yeah, thank you, Eva. That's 100%. I think we all agree with that. So, as a closing question, I think I just think of like one more question. Joel, is there anything you just learned or something new that you just learned about the situation here in Indonesia, especially when it comes to the movement that Gardapangan does?
I learned again how many great entrepreneurs there are around the world, trying to do their best to help. But I learned how inadequate the government responses are.
Okay. The same question to Eva. Is there anything new that you just learned from Hunger Free America and from Joel?
Of course, I think what I admire from Joel is he's very vocal. He's very vocal. and speak up. I think that's the things that I write in the book, but never really have the courage to speak up actually about the democracy related hunger issues. But Joel just say it very easily, and it gave me courage to actually speak up more about it.
Yeah. And I know, without getting anything too sensitive, it's been dangerous for some people to speak up where you are over the years. In general, particularly for a white male, I can speak up without being thrown in prison, but it's a lot less dangerous. Can I close? I just curious, what's each of your favorite local dish, either street dish or dish you eat at a restaurant or home?
My favorite one?
Yeah.
I have a lot of favorite local dish. Let's say gado-gado. It's like salad in peanut butter sauce. And what does it mean?
No, so I was just curious. I love food. I only had Indonesian food and in Netherlands and a little in the U.S., but I know it's great food, so I'm always curious. I know you use peanuts on a lot of things, so I'm looking forward to visiting.
Oh yeah, there's one more thing, Denisa, if I may add. Sure. I think the discussion today with Joel with Hunger Free America will be much more about the charity, sharing food, food distributions, and so on. But I'm very glad that Joel actually touched the very basic foundation or the root cause of the hunger. Thank you, Joel, for touching that. I actually
thank you, and I want to follow up with you.
Should I speak about this or not?
And I want to follow up with you. One of the things we're thinking about is helping sponsor an international anti-hunger conference and maybe doing it virtually. I've always thought, we should a lot of money, very different, but we could do it virtually and really highlight sort of the advocacy issues that unite us and really build an international demand, pressure the United Nations to do more, on this and really build an international people's movement too. Because I think most Indonesians would be shocked to know there's hunger in the United States. And so we really need to help understand this is a universal problem because of a universal failure of our. On that note, thank you all. I'm about to see a famous waterfall in Argentina on the Argentina-Brazil border.
Okay. Really appreciate it. So I think that marks the end of the discussion. Of course, here, if you'd like to continue the discussion, I think you can exchange a contact and then have further discussion or probably potential collaboration between Garda Pangan and Hunger Free America. So that this is just like a start. And it's always exciting to learn something new. I'm pretty sure our online audiences, and both from Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, and also Americans, Joel earlier mentioned that there's a possibility that more of your viewers will watch the show probably sometimes later because of the time zone and the time difference. But I'm pretty sure it's not only both of the speakers and me, the moderator, that learns something new about this discussion. I'm also honestly very glad that this discussion doesn't only stop about talking about the issue, about the problems, but we go like down under to the core, to the foundation of the problems, that this is not just about the food scarcity. People can find food anywhere, but that's not the real problem. I guess everyone agrees here that this is a very fundamental issue. This also correlates with environmental, healthcare, and also other social structures in both of America and Indonesia. And this is not just about the problem for the underdeveloped countries. Even the developed countries, the US, also experience the same thing, just probably from different perspective. And we use probably different approach in doing or providing the solution. But at the same time, by the end of the day, the goal is still the same for both Garda Pangan and Hunger Free America to never exist anymore because the problem is no longer there. So thank you so much for both of the speakers, for your time, for your
Thank you.
We really appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I just want to also reinforce this also is a gender equity issue. It's
Yes.
a gender equity issue in Indonesia, but in the United States, households headed by single women have 3 times the hunger rates of overall. So we need more democracy and more gender equity. I know I'm speaking to 2 women, so it's not a shocking claim, but I think we need to keep that as part of the conversation.
Definitely. And I think it's also an issue in Indonesia because I didn't even mention that. Sometimes I didn't realize there's a problem here. So thank you so much for the reminder, Joel. And thank you, Eva, for your time. It was
Thank
a very
you. Have a good day.
discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to give it back to our MC of the day, Yanara. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for your participation today. I hope that everyone gained a lot of knowledge and insight, and I hope everyone also had fun. Thank you so much to our speaker, Mr. Joel Berg and Mbak Eva Bahtiar, for sharing us your knowledge, and also to our moderator, Kak Denisa, for moderating today's discussion. Now, earlier in this event, we asked audience members a trivia question, and that question was, which US state has the worst food insecurity? Is it A, Nevada, B, Louisiana, C, New Mexico, or D, Mississippi? And the correct answer to that is D, Mississippi. The most food insecure state following the impacts of COVID-19 is Mississippi, scoring 33 out of a 50-point scale. Shout out goes out to @TonyAriwibowo from Instagram for answering the question correctly. And thank you to everyone else who has also participated on our QOTD. Now you may be wondering, how can I develop an awesome idea for Ad America? It's very easy. All you need to do is visit our website at www.atmerica.or.id. And then you can select create an event and collaborate with us. All event proposals coming to us will be reviewed, and your event might be featured with us soon. Also, don't forget to follow us on our social medias on Instagram, Twitter, and also Facebook at @ATAmerica for our event updates, fun content, and so much more. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and newsletter as well. With that, it is time to say goodbye. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Genara, and see you soon at the next Ad America event. Goodbye.